Weeks after the National Assembly passed two critical pieces of legislation that raised and dashed hopes, these bills are yet to be transmitted to President Muhammadu Buhari for his assent. Many interest groups have also called on President Buhari to reject this bill and return it to the Parliament for proper legislative work. The Senior Special Assistant to the President on Legislative Matters says the President is aware of the concerns raised and will continue to strengthen the relationship between the executive and legislature that is already yielding fruits.
Break 4, 15 bills were assented by Mr. President. And of course, other bills were transmitted, some of which had lapsed. And I cannot give you the exact number of the bills that had been transmitted, but I know that 15 bills were assented, which I think is a commendable thing. That the President had to give directives that his ministers must stay and honor invitations of the National Assembly, not only in budget circles or budget defense, but in all cases.
Residents of Iseyin in Oyo State now look forward to getting justice for the killing of 5 people in their community by the Nigerian Customs Service. The House of Representatives has opened an investigative hearing into the incident as the Customs Service already admitted to the killing.
And shot sporadically at the vehicle leading to the death of the indigents. Regrets that the ancient town of Ojaoba was thrown into mourning on a day when they should have been celebrating the Eid al-Fitr due to acts of negligence, abuse of authority, gross misconduct, and disregard for human lives by men of Nigerian Customs Service.
When you consider the nearness of Iseyin town to the nearest border, if not more than 200, it will be 200 kilometers to the border. And we believe that there is a stipulation of 25 kilometers to the border where the customs can operate. If they were able to catch these smugglers within that limit, we believe they were performing their duty.
They didn't just come armless. They were well armed because they carry cutlasses, they carry machetes, they carry big trees and sticks, they carry stones, try to attack the officers while on the road. So, looking at what is going on, the officers swiftly dispersed them by making a shot on the sky. They successfully dispersed them, sir. And they have conveyed their seizure to their base at Iseyin.
Joining us on the program to put issues in perspective and answer some questions is the spokesman of the House of Representatives, Honorable Benjamin Kalu. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. And viewers, thank you for tuning in.
We know the National Assembly are on their long annual recess, but there seems to be an unusual silence among members of the House of Representatives. What are lawmakers in the lower chamber up to?
There is no law around the lower chamber at the moment. As you know, we usually go for annual vacation, and the speaker insisted that this time members should rest, because once we come back, as you know, we're going to be busy with the budget and other activities. So if we don't rest well, it will be difficult for us to be able to do what Nigerians expect us to do. So we are resting, but while doing that, a couple of us are still busy with some oversight responsibilities. I'm speaking to you from Benin, where we have come to oversight MPDC. So any moment from now, maybe an hour, I'll be joining my team to visit the facility and to oversight them. And there are other committees also that are busy with various responsibilities. So nothing is happening with the lower chamber. We are having a rest to enable us to jump faster when we come back.
It is still uncertain when the Electoral Act Amendment Bill will become law. Can you tell us when the National Assembly is likely to transmit this very important legislation to the presidency for assent?
Nigerians should always remember that we have bicameral legislature. And by that, it means that we have two houses, two chambers that looks into the process of lawmaking. One is the House of Rep that I belong to. The other is the Senate. And for us to have a credible piece of legislation that represents the expectation of the citizens, the two chambers always looks at crossing the T's and dotting the I's to make sure at the end of the day, it reflects what the public, the citizens desire. Having said so, the Electoral Act happened to be one of those pieces of legislation that has been handled at the same time by both chambers through a joint committee that was formed because of the expediency of this particular piece of legislation. And the procedure is after going through the process of passing it at both chambers. If there are areas that are, divergent in presentation by any of the chambers, there is a committee called the Conference Committee. And the purpose of that Conference Committee is to be able to harmonize the position of both chambers, so that at the end of the day, it will be a synchronized piece of legislation that captures both the positions of the House of Rep and that of Senate. So it is after that it will be transmitted to the clerk of the National Assembly. Once it is read, it is fixed, it is sent to the clerk of the National Assembly, who will then transmit it to the president. Many have asked the question whether this conference committee is going to happen between now and the time we resume. I'm sure the leadership of both chambers are considering that, saying that it is important that we fine-tune, especially those areas that Nigerians are concerned about, so that we can push it in as soon as possible.
Section 52, subsection 3 of this amended act turned out very controversial when it was discussed on the floor of the two chambers. Can you clearly highlight those issues that divided lawmakers both in the House and the Senate?
This has been an interesting issue for Nigerians for a while now. And how we handle what you regard as section, but we call it clause, because at the stage of being a bill proposal, it is a clause. When it becomes an act, it becomes a section. So we have what was proposed to us as clause 52, sub 2, on the piece of legislation that we handle. And I think the Senate introduced 52.3. But the content of both are almost the same, but not exactly so. I say so because we left our clause 52.2 exactly the same way we receive it from the committee as proposed by people who sent in their memoranda, the CSOs, INEC, and a whole lot of other stakeholders who sent in their memoranda for during the public hearing. And what did 52.2 say? 52.2 is saying the discretion is left in the hands of INEC to decide when to use manual or electronic transmission of votes. That is for us. So we did not touch it. We left it as we saw it, seeing that that is what Nigerians desire, that the independence of unbiased umpire should be seen in the decision they take with regards to oppression that would deliver the objective, the expectation of Nigerians, which is a credible election with credible result.
What would you say are the gains of the bill if it eventually becomes law?
Because many Nigerians are wondering why Electoral Act? Why are we opting for this one that everybody is talking about? As you know, we live in a dynamic society. We are determined to strengthen our democracy, are determined to enhance our democratic position, to be akin to the celebrated advanced democratic societies in the world. In doing that, the legal framework must be looked at to ensure that it reflects a bridge to the gaps that have been observed over the years. So the target of this is to strengthen the legal framework. And in doing so, there are certain aspects that, this exercise tend to look at, one of which is the use of technological devices, like everybody have been asking for, like card reader, to accommodate it in this particular piece of legislation. What is the criteria for substituting candidates? Those are some of the targets it's looking at. What about disclosure of source of fund for political parties? Where is this money coming from? Who funded the election? From where? Where is the source? What about the replacement of loss or damage card? What does the law say about it? What about punishment for those who are found with cards that does not belong to them, who are holding it illegally? How about primaries, which is where the commencement of the selection of those who lead us starts from? Because if you miss it at the primary level, I bet you Nigerians will only be limited to those number of people that have crossed the primary. So that's why the primary election is important. And when it comes, it's also very important. So the law is going to be looking at, how it should not come earlier than 150 days to the expiration of those in office, and how it should not, should not come later than 120 days before election. So the target is to look at about 300 clauses. People, call it amendment, Electoral Act amendment. It's not what it is. It is repeal and enactment. We're actually repealing the 2010 number 6, the Amendment Act. And we are enacting these new ones. And we're looking at about 300 clauses that will bring certain innovation. I am afraid, I'm not so sure that you have the time for us to be able to bring out all the benefits that is found in this piece of legislation because of time. We might look at, time might allow us to look at about 17 of it. Now, if you look at clause 3 of this particular piece of legislation, you will see that it has specified early funding of INEC. And that is going to give INEC what they call financial independence, of financial freedom. And it will allow them plan their logistics early. It will allow them start spending money on training their people early. Unlike before, the 2019 election had a budget of about 184 billion. Out of this 184 billion, only about 143 billion was released to INEC. That is about 76% of this money was released to INEC on the 21st of, not the 2nd of November 2018, leaving about 24%, which was only released around the 21st of December 2018, which was 57 days to the election. It puts them under a huge pressure. So that had been cured by clause 3 of this particular new legislation. Now, if you go to clause 8, you will see the declaration of non-partisan status of anybody who wants to work in INEC. So if you want to work in INEC, you must declare that you're not a member of any party. You must be found not to belong to any party. Because if you say INEC is unbiased, umpire, independent, you must not belong to any political philosophy. You must be neutral. And if you are found to have any affiliation with a party, that is a punitive measure that has been, included in this piece of legislation. And it is 5 years imprisonment or 5 million, fines. Who wants to pay that? So now, if you want to be a member of a party, you leave INEC. If you want to, work for INEC, you leave the party. So the two of them cannot go together. Now, if you go to clause 9, you'll be seeing National Register of Voters, which was not, there before. It's going to now be both manual and electronic. The beauty of this is that, INEC will now maintain a database that anybody can move into and check what is, on the database of his polling unit or ward or local government. It helps for planning purposes. It helps INEC to plan. It helps the political party to plan. It helps the candidate to plan. The only concern is the privacy of data rights. Data privacy rights. It's what people are worried about. That INEC should ensure in doing that the data rights of people, their privacy, should be sustained. Now, if you also go to clause 15, you will find that INEC has power now to print and issue this register of voters. So if you want to have a copy, you go to INEC and then you make a payment of a certain amount of fees and they will give it to you for you to go and do efficient planning as well, especially for the party. So you know where you put your effort. If this polling unit has 1,000 and the other one has 200 people, you know how to distribute your resources during campaign, distribute your time during campaign. Another benefit that we also have to, applaud is in this particular piece of legislation is found in clause 18, which has to do with replacement of voters' cards that have been destroyed or lost. Before now, it was not really acknowledged. But with what we have put together, the law is clear on what should be done on that. Now, it is also important to note in clause 19 of this particular piece of legislation, display of copies of voters' list, which will help electorate to check for errors in their details on that register, to enable them address them and enable them bring it to the knowledge of INEC, has been captured by clause 19 of this particular piece of legislation. Then clause 25 has to do with election day selection. in line with the provision. This is in line with the provision of the Constitution, but it is the mandate of this particular INEC agency to select the date and the time for election, not earlier than 150 days and not later than 30 days before the expiration of the tenure of the incumbent office holder. So you also look at clause 26. Of course, 26 had to do with postponement of election in an emergency. You see, most people will go and cause trouble in polling units and delay election or hurt people. Now, INEC has the mandate to come and look at the trouble, disruptions, and then cancel the election there and choose a new day for that election to take place. So this is a benefit, and it's to safeguard citizens who come out to vote so that nobody will come there breaking their head. You know that if you cause harm, the election will be cancelled automatically. Now, there is another beautiful one that is called the oath of neutrality, which is found in clause 28. Oath of neutrality is the one that will be taken by everybody who wants to work for INEC, whether you're a security officer, whether you are, electoral officer, whether you're a polling unit agent, and whatever, designation. You must take that oath that shows you're going to be neutral, because that is what INEC stands for.
The House was thrown into rancor in the build-up to the passage of the PIB and the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. How does the leadership hope to restore relationships that have been battered by the confrontation and the physical combats we saw?
In Parliament, people of various interests come together in our colors of diversity to advance nation building efforts. In doing so, one should respect rancor, acrimony, misunderstanding, disagreeing to agree. Debate in itself is a fight, where some will say yes, some will say no, some will argue positively, some will argue, negatively on the same issue. That is the one that is allowed in the sacredness of the chamber of Parliament, of plenary, because it's a hallowed ground. Violence is not tolerated. Physical combat is not tolerated. Does it happen once in a while? It does, even in other climes. But we have mechanism in the House to be able to check it. Ethics and Privileges is a committee that handles the behavior of members of the House. And I'm sure they are looking into this. Also, the leadership of the House will make efforts to discipline those who have gone against the principles upon which we stand as a House. While doing that, a reconciliation move that will create a healthy atmosphere for us to relate with one another, moving the nation forward, will not be a far cry from one of the propositions that will be coming forward in healing the minds of so many people about those two important bills, the PIB and the Electoral Act. Sentiments, interests, those were the things that are played. It's expected, but it should also be managed as parliamentarians. And I'm sure we will handle that. I'm sure the House will be able to handle that. We're going to come back, we're coming back. A more unified House, we're coming back. A more solid House.
The just concluded nationwide Congress of your party, the APC, appears to have plunged the party into some abyss. How does the party hope to calm frayed nerves?
No, as spokesperson of the House of Representatives, I speak only for the parliament. I don't speak for the party. Yes, I'm a member of INEC, but I'm not a spokesperson. I'm not in the caretaker committee, and I'm sure they have a mouthpiece, and I'm sure they will address this issue. So they are the right people to channel this discussion to. For me, my limit is within issues that fall within the parameter of the parliament, the National Assembly. And I would like to keep it that way. So send that question to those who has gotten the capacity and the mandate to address it.
That's our program for this week. You can watch this episode again on TVC News YouTube channel. Also follow us on all our social media platforms to get fresh updates on activities in the Parliament. Thank you for watching. See you next time.